Welcome to Ad.
Welcome to the third episode of AI Cubed, the podcast where we talk about the latest AI news, analysis, and predictions. My name's Alan, an AI investor, and I have my partner here, Albert.
Hey everyone, I'm Albert. I am a product manager at Amazon.
Awesome. Well, in this episode, we're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about DeepSeek and the implications around it in the context of other models. We're going to talk about our AI predictions for 2025 and some exciting apps that Albert's been playing with over the break period. With that said, let's kick off with DeepSeek. So I'm sure many of you have heard about what DeepSeek is, but just a quick refresher, DeepSeek effectively is a Chinese AI company that's just trained their own model, DeepSeek version 3, which has effectively done it on a very small budget using H800 chips, which is slower version, maybe not slower version. Albert can go into this into more detail of the H100 chip, and it's done it on a shoestring budget that's outperformed some of the bigger models here. With that said, I'll hand over to Albert to share some of his thoughts around it.
Yeah, first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the year. Didn't think we'd make it to 25, but we are here. And so, yeah, it's big news to start the year. I think in 24, a lot of the focus is on, what how are existing models going to grow? How are OpenAI's and Anthropic's and Google's models going to grow? And all of a sudden, we have a Chinese model come out just near the tail end of 24, which, as Alan alluded to, is trained on a shoestring budget. And so what makes this really unique is based on some of the ongoing like export controls, China and Chinese companies don't have access to the same levels of hardware that US companies do. Specifically, the difference between the NVIDIA H100 and the NVIDIA H800 chips. The H800s are the ones that the Chinese have access to, and the difference between the 800s and the 100s is there is a reduced data transfer speed between the different chips. And so if you think about one of these massive chips, it's really a collection of a lot of different things. Like that's kind of how NVIDIA is creating all of that power. They're bundling a lot of things together. And so one key component of that is how quickly can data pass between the different components of this massive, massive chip. And so because that's slower, I think the purpose of that was to make it more difficult for Chinese companies to be able to, have the same level of processing speed and, training that American companies would when with the 100 chips. But what's been really, really interesting here is how this Chinese company was able to kind of work around that using a different kind of approach to train this model. And so last episode when we were talking about how the foundational models were evolving, we were talking a bit about how there's beginning to reach a point in terms of diminishing returns on the existing approach of just shoving a ton of data at a lot of compute. And like this is an example of how, based on the benchmarks that Alan's put on screen here, it performs like as good or better in most of these benchmarks than Claude 3.5 and GPT-4o. But they did so with, a fraction of the amount of chips needed, as well as the inference cost to end consumers is also a lot cheaper as well. So customers that are using Claude 3.5 or 4.0 right now, using those APIs, there's certain amounts of pricing that they have to pay. It's a lot cheaper to use DeepSeek for those same kind of use cases for comparable performance. So it's really, really incredible how the company was able to come up with a model on par with a much cheaper training cost and also just disrupt the market with much lower pricing as well.
Yeah, so with that said, I think what's really interesting and kind of hilarious at the same time is a lot of people have talked about how DeepSeek apparently is trained on the outputs of ChatGPT. So effectively, it's using some of the output query that ChatGPT is putting and using that to train its own DeepSeek model. So when you ask it, what model are you? It believes it's ChatGPT. And so in some instances, some people are saying it's a photocopy of a photocopy, right? And so there's that Spider-Man meme where, the Spider-Man's pointing at each other and asking who's who. But with that said, what are your thoughts, Albert, around, you know, how sustainable is this? Is this just a one-off where they're able to copy the outputs of a model? I feel like there's always got to be a leader that has to innovate and train the almost frontier model to get to that point. But I don't know if you have any thoughts around it.
Yeah, I think there's two ways we can think about this. The first is just from an innovation standpoint. I absolutely agree with you there. I think there has to be a leader. I will say that DeepSeek, it's hard to say exactly like what their training data set was. Based on this, it looks like at least some significant portion of it was based on GPT-4 outputs, which for better or for worse is able to make it reach the same kinds of problems that GPT-4 can solve, but it may also end up having the same weaknesses that GPT-4 may have. But I think what's interesting and the other way to look about this is their focus here, yes, they did better than GPT 4.0 and Claude 3.5. But even if they didn't do better, but they were significantly cheaper, I think that alone is disruptive in the market. And so if there's a follower, for instance, that is able to, just constantly lag behind OpenAI and, copy or reproduce the same levels of effectiveness, but at a fraction of the cost, that itself is an enduring advantage there because now like OpenAI is not going to be able to, they're going to lose their
Well,
market share in that way.
well, I think that probably also triggers another point around OpenAI, where, to Andrea Kapati's point, one of the original founders of OpenAI, it just means the race is on. OpenAI has the opportunity to become a lot more efficient around what they're doing as well with the resources they have. Uh, so, it will be interesting to see what they come up with. It's always that 80-20 Pareto principle, but the last 20% is always going to be a lot more challenging than that first 80%. So,
Yeah.
I think it goes to show there's still a lot more opportunity in this space, despite the slowdown that we talked about last week.
It is, but now you think about like OpenAI as a company, and now they have to be defensive and offensive. Defensive in that you have to continuously push the envelope and, well, offensive in that you have to push the envelope and coming up with brand new, fancier capabilities, the O1, O3, maybe even O4, O5 models after that, right? Just constantly pushing the edge of what is
Yeah.
possible. But now you have to play defensive because if there's someone that's, kind of on your tail and they're cheaper than you, that's going to put a lot of financial strain on you, and you're not going to have the ability to keep innovating.
So I think what's really interesting here when it comes down to the slowdown around AI is how good do the models have to be for the specific use case that you're working on, right?
Yeah.
Because it may come to a point where the 4.0 or the O1 or the new O3 model is just good enough. It's just good enough for the use case that you need, right? So it becomes where it to a point where over time a commodity because everyone can catch up to the model where it might just be good enough for that specific use case because there's a lot that sits around you know vertical AI use cases around the experience, around the routing, around what data that you implement it with, around the prompt engineering. It's not just the model itself that matters in terms of the end experience for the user. So I think there will be a bunch of use cases where the model is just good enough and you might not need to use a better model. Like even now with a multimodal approach, right? As we talked about, we're finding that people are happy with these O1 mini models or 4.0 mini models that for particular small use cases is just good enough. You don't need that frontier model anymore. Uh, yeah, keen
Yeah.
to hear if you have
No,
any
yeah. I
thoughts
think
around
that's
this. Yeah.
fair. I think that's fair, but and uh arguably one could say that we're even at that point for some applications right now. Because now, like in terms of just what the models are able to do, um depending on how you use the model, you can achieve a number of creative use cases. You can achieve a number of, coding use cases. There's not going to be perfect, but to kind of make it faster for developers to build things, like absolutely, I think it's where it is today is there. And I think I saw a post on Reddit the other day. It's interesting. I think someone asked GPT, where do you think, like, what do you think is like one of the most like controversial like takes that you have? And GPT's output was I think as an AI model, like right now, I'm already very capable, the limitation right now is on the humans that are using me because they're not creating prompts efficiently. Most people go to ChatGPT and say, write this, right? Versus like over the last couple weeks, I've gotten a lot more adept at like building, properly structured prompts. To be fair, I cheat. I tell ChatGPT, I'm like, come up with a very well structured prompt using prompt engineering principles, blah, blah, blah. But like just seeing the difference in the output when you do a very well structured prompt versus a simple one is night and day. So arguably, you could say that we are kind of at that point. At which point, then I guess the question is there incremental value in continuing to push the envelope in building and increasing, coding capabilities and all of that? Or for mass market appeal, is it better to go cheaper right now so that companies can build, businesses that actually apply AI?
Yeah. I I think from a willingness to pay standpoint, the TAM of AGI effectively is, you know, billions, if not trillions of dollars around, replacing white collar white white collar labor around vertical use cases, legal, financial services, healthcare, the list goes on and on. I think just the TAM around human labor, in a morbid way is big enough for companies to continue to invest
Well,
and strive for that.
I
Yeah.
guess the question is for a lot of those use cases, how many of them need a model that is, the top 1% on a code force's coding test, right? Like
Okay.
if you're
So,
thinking the use case that you talked about, legal, healthcare, etc., right? If you think about like how these companies operate, they operate based on, hiring people and training people, people that have gone through some amount of schooling, and they train them, right? They give them the experience, they train them that way. Where AI is right now in its ability to pattern match based on the training data that it has, one could argue that it is good enough where it is right now. It's more of how you design the interfaces, how you design the
yeah.
workflows, how you design, and implement AI as opposed to the capability of the foundational model itself.
Yeah. So let's just play a devil's advocate around this right now. There's several coding tools in the market. Replit, Cursor, Lovable, list goes on and on. These coding tools, they're not perfect. It's very difficult to get a one-shot type of response where it's perfect. You're going to have to modulate and change that quite a lot, fix errors, fix bugs, manually go through the code, right? But there could be a time where if the models get trained up well enough that it gets to a point where you can one-shot build an app just like that. And how much would that be worth to someone? How much would you be willing to pay for that?
I would argue that that's not worth as much as you think it is. And here's why. When you think about a one-shot ability to build an app, it's really only as good as the requirements you give it. And I think any seasoned software engineer is gonna be able is gonna agree. Like most people are shit at giving like instructions and requirements. They're gonna say, build me an app for, like a healthcare use case, right? And they'll just say that. And the thing is, no matter how effective you are, it's so ambiguous that your ability to build something that effective,
Well,
it's not a coding
well,
problem,
okay,
it's a
okay. Let
requirements
me
problem.
let me counter that then. In the future around the user experience, there'll be a set of sub prompts that come underneath it, right?
Yeah.
When you say build me a healthcare app as an example, there could be a series of questions that come out that asks the user, so who's the target market for this? What's the problem you're solving for? What type of UI design do you want? Do you want simple? Do you want modern?
Yeah.
Do you want what type of colors do you want? Right?
Yep.
So there could be a series of different sub prompts that sit underneath it, or like what type of data do you want to use? Where do you
Which
want to source this
I don't
data
disagree with
from?
that. I think that's more, but
Yeah,
again, I think that's more of like a UI design, how you implement and design the experience involving AI, as opposed to improving the capabilities of the
yeah,
foundational
but
model itself.
but like even if okay, in a world we live in today, let's say we're to give all these structured prompts to one of
Yeah.
these apps, Replit, Cursor, Lovable, whatever you want to use, right? It still takes a lot of work to fine tune it to get it to a point where it is a workable app. We're not at the point yet where if you give it specific prompts, it can actually just deliver a almost perfect app out
Well,
of the
I guess
box
let
right
me ask
now.
you this. Like,
Yeah.
how many people do you think are just gonna want to take that perfect app and not make any other adjustments to it? Or like how many people are gonna want to
Well,
continuously tinker and tweak it a little bit after as
well,
well?
well, yeah. If you want to tweak it, it's easy. You just use a natural language around it. I want to change. Want to add a chart here. I
Yeah.
want to add a video feature here. I want to put Facebook login here, and it can just do it in the back end for you because it's not at that level where it can just do it quickly. And so, just my view around this, I think there is still a long ways to go around getting these use cases perfect, right? And even around legal use cases, financial services, healthcare, there's still a lot of risk around
Yeah. I I do want
the
okay,
answers
so
being incorrect.
I want to divide into these two because coding I do see a little bit differently because I think the problem with coding is not so much the ability to do a one shot or like a multi-shot approach to being able to build an app. Because if you're just building an app, like it doesn't really matter whether you're iterating on that a little bit. I don't think companies are going to care that much if they have, someone that has to manage and talk with the AI and improve it a little bit over time. So I think that that is not as big of a deal from a coding standpoint. Where it needs to improve is architecture. Because the when you're building an app and when you're trying to build like a SaaS app, for instance, if I'm trying to replicate SAP or I'm trying to replicate an ERP system from Oracle, etc., like the architecture for that is really what matters. And I think that's a limiting area where AI is not able to understand the requirements and then generate a effective architecture that's scalable, etc. I think that is where it needs to improve. But when we come to healthcare and legal, it's not so much a coding architectural problem at that point. Now it's more of a user experience, user design standpoint. And so it's a question of can you design and build effective workflows? And I think that I guess unless you're saying that foundational models are going to be able to design, for you, uh, and I don't know if that's the realm they're pushing foundational models. I think that's going to be a limiting factor.
Oh yeah, like just to quickly wrap, I think that's the purpose of reasoning and chain of thought models, right? It breaks down your prompt into sub prompts in order to get you a better outcome. Um, but yeah, so we'll see where that leads us. With that said, should we talk about big predictions around 2025?
Yeah,
Uh,
let's
so
do that.
do you want to go first, or I can go first?
Yeah, I'll start.
Yeah.
Yeah, 25. I mean, it's interesting first. I guess like if we think about 24, I think and there were a lot of grand ambition. There was a lot of hope and hype, I think in 22, 23, leading up to 24. Like I think, Microsoft took the race early with creating a Copilot, embedding it into all these different applications. I know Wall Street was very excited and thinking that was going to be the future. Uh, and 24 kind of showed that it didn't really pan out. Like I think 24 has kind of been a filler year. There hasn't really been as much innovation, or there's been innovation for sure, but there's nothing that's been really hype worthy, or at least we're getting more desensitized to it. And so I think like 25, I see as a year of continuous incremental progress. I think we're going to see capabilities that we have today. We're going to see those begin to be like continuously improve over time, but not in ways that revolutionize. Like for instance, DeepSeek coming out being super cheap. I think stuff like that's going to happen. And we're going to continuously, improve the benchmark scores. But for the average human, I think the average person doesn't care about these kinds of things. What I think they will care about, and I think this is where we're going to begin seeing is the emergence of agentic AI. And it's been a topic that's been talked about the last couple of years, but it comes back to what I was saying before. It's how do we build the workflows and build the like integrate AI more into our work? I think that's the area that we're going to see things begin to evolve in 25, just like we saw RPA in 20 late 2010s as well. But just seeing companies begin to adopt. I know a lot of companies are interested. Just in my line of
Do
work,
you
I've spoken to
do you
some.
want to
Yeah.
just give a quick summary of agents and why they could
Yes.
be impactful and what they are? Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the idea of agentic AI is it's essentially trying to replace like a worker. Uh, I think that's the simplest way to describe it. It's someone that, like, if you think of someone that you hire, they have access to all these tools and capabilities at their fingertips, and you tell them like, "Hey, I need X and Y done," and then they'll go and do the task, and they'll use all the tools at their disposal. They'll, talk to other coworkers, talk to stakeholders to make things happen. And that's essentially what an agent is supposed to do. Is it's going to have access to a number of different tools through APIs. It will intelligently know when to use which tools. It will orchestrate its own workflows and produce the same kind of work. And so instead of you having to build purpose-built AI, it is more broad purpose. It is able to use a number of different tools, and it can talk to other agents as well. As I think that's the grand ambition is you have a company where you have a manager that has a team of agents that go off and do their own thing, and you can orchestrate the whole thing where they just run autonomously. I don't think we're going to be there in 25. I think we're going to begin to see AI agents begin to be experimented with more
Yeah.
heavily.
Like I'm seeing a lot of startups move into that space where effectively they try to gather proprietary data around a specific field and they effectively try to find an expert, an expert lawyer, or expert financial advisor, or expert doctor, and effectively try to emulate their workflow or their knowledge and try to build that into an AI uh, application where effectively you could copy and paste this real human at scale at low cost. So I definitely think that's where the world's moving towards, and a lot of exciting companies into that space.
Yeah, I do
Um,
actually. I want to differentiate a little bit though. So I think what you're describing still seems very specialist driven, where you're replacing one specific function versus agentic AI is supposed to be multi-purpose. It can
we're talking
do
about
a
AGI
lot of
now.
different. No, not that's not AGI.
Okay.
It's more just like think about like if you're thinking about a doctor, then what are the things you ask the doctor to do? It's going to be, I need help diagnosing X, or I need, doing this and this. Versus for agent, we're thinking more like white collar, for instance. So think of a data analyst, right? Like a data analyst, or maybe no, let's do a consultant, like, just because you and I used to be consultants at some point. Like think about the number of different types of tasks that a consultant has to deal with, right? Sometimes we're building slides, sometimes we have to participate in a meeting, we have to pull together meeting notes, etc. Like there's a lot of variety in what we do. And so it's something that has access to a number of different tools. It'll have access to Microsoft Teams, to all the documents that are available. And so like when a manager tells it, hey, I need you to pull together a research plan for, this project, it'll not only read all the data that's in the company, but it'll also go talk to people like it'll reach out to people and send them a message on Teams and say, hey, give me this, I need this information, can you give me this, and it will build the plan and bring that information together. Versus AGI, I think, is higher level than that, where it's able to learn and reason at a much higher level than just trying to complete tasks. So I think that's going to be the distinction between the two.
Yeah, it's basically your autonomous worker to
Yeah,
follow you
exactly.
around and do as you please for your specific
Yeah.
area. With
Yeah.
that said, I think it's similar to sort of my prediction around, well, there's a lot of talk around vertical AI and agents will replace B2B SaaS. And I think that's still big cool. I think there's a few buckets of B2B SaaS that will be very difficult to be replaced by AI. I'll just give you one example here. If you had a payroll HR B2B SaaS, it's already integrated your system,
Yeah.
it's already working well, everyone gets paid on time, everyone manage their HR admin through this platform. It's going to be very difficult to replace that with AI. Like, what's the user interface going to look like? Are you just going to chat to someone to get your information? It's like chat is not as efficient as a clean UI with the information that you need. So I think in that regard, it's going to be really difficult. I do see these B2B SaaS platforms adding AI as a feature. So it could be a chatbot where you can access information faster or answer HR related questions in that specific use case. I do think there is another bucket of small one-off solutions that rather than get a SaaS solution for, you can build your own application for. And if you haven't, I'd highly recommend this. Just as an example, like I needed to pull some information using an API and do some analysis around it. And I don't know how to code Python or SQL that well. I know the basics, but effectively, I just asked ChatGPT to write me a API code to get this from this specific API. And I was able to build this application in Streamlit super quick within 5 or 10 minutes. So I do think even if you're a traditional business analyst or a software engineer, using these AI tools, you can quickly build quick tools or applications, Chrome extensions even, in a very quick manner. A lot of people are actually building the custom Chrome extensions right now that we can share at perhaps a later episode. So I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of these quick tools that people can build very easily now.
Do you think this is going to be the death of the micro SaaS trend that influencers keep pushing on YouTube, where they're like, "Hey, you want to make 1,000 or $5,000 a month? Build this micro SaaS by doing this and this."
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like I've paid for like a $1 screenshot application that sits, on my as a Chrome extension. But I could probably just as easily build that myself now. But I think it's just people don't know what they don't know. Like I think over time enterprises will realize more and more value that they can just quickly build tools and roll them out in a quick manner.
Yeah, maybe the value is, what we were talking about earlier is how you package it as opposed to how it's powered.
Sure. With that said, we only have a few minutes left. Albert, do you want to quickly talk through maybe one or two of your favorite tools that you use over the break period?
Yeah, I've definitely been playing with a lot more of these solutions. I think the cool, I think people probably already know this one, but Notebook LM is one that I've definitely been playing a lot more with right now. One, just because the podcast capability. So basically, what Notebook LM is, you can upload a whole bunch of different data, and then it allows you to ask questions on it, generate text. But what's interesting is you can generate a two-person podcast, and listening to those people, listening to podcasts, listening to them kind of banter with each other. It's really interesting. It's an interesting way for you to kind of learn and engage with the topic. And so,
I mean, is
yeah.
is there any point of us even recording this podcast anymore?
Yeah, no, we'll be automated next time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it made me think, like, as a product manager, I wonder why Google decided that the two-person podcast specifically was the feature they wanted to
Yeah.
integrate. But
But
yeah.
but but having said that, I think there is a human element to it where humans don't want to listen to two AIs talking. It's just my personal like I'd put like even a TikTok video. I don't want to watch AI generated content. I want to see content made by real humans.
Well,
I,
there's okay. So
yeah,
yeah, I agree with that. Definitely uncanny valley. But there was a post on another post I saw on Reddit, which is like, when it was like a reaction pic. It's like when you see fewer AI posts, like fewer AI generated posts online, and it's like the realization when you see fewer AI generated posts, the implication being you can no longer tell that it's AI. So
oh, it's hard to tell these days.
it's getting harder. It's getting harder.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the key trick behind it is if it looks too good, it's AI.
Ah,
So
maybe 2025, last prediction is the year when we can no longer tell.
maybe I think we'd still be able to tell at least in the near term.
All right, 26
Um,
it is.
any last apps you want to talk through?
Other than that, I really like a GitHub Copilot for Visual Studio Code. I promise I'm not shilling Microsoft here, but like originally when I first used Copilot, like inline updates, better IntelliSense, the chat, that's kind of cool. But the ability for it to edit code files directly, which is really neat. And I know some of the tools you mentioned, like Cursor, I think I was playing with Windsurf, they have that as well. You just describe what you want, it'll go through and scan and find all the files you want to update. I know there's a client extension that does the same, but hats off to the GitHub Copilot team for building that feature natively and working with Visual Studio Code team to integrate that. Super helpful. Really love it. Helps me put things together really quickly. So absolutely love it.
Nice. All right. With that said, we'll wrap up today's episode of AI Cubed. Thanks so much for joining. Cheers.
Happy New Year.